Did you know? Did you know? Whole grains are superfood. Part 3. We have uncovered quite a lot, and we are in the 3rd part of this little section.
And much to go.
Last week we looked a little bit at, anybody remember?
Cancer.
Yeah. We looked a little bit at how whole grains actually can help to ward off cancer and help to decrease our risk of developing certain cancers. Now we're going to look a little bit at diabetes and whole grains. How are they related? We know a lot that a lot of people say, I have diabetes, I cannot eat bread. I shouldn't eat this, I shouldn't eat that because I have diabetes. Well, in some cases, you shouldn't. And I agree 100% in some cases, because all the refined things, you really should not. Several studies suggest that eating whole grain may reduce insulin resistance and fasten insulin level. Now let me just, insulin resistance. A lot of people who have the diabetes, the main problem is insulin resistance. It's not that the body is not producing insulin, but the body is not utilizing the insulin. A lot of people with a lot of fat cells, they are resistant to the action of insulin. So in a lot of cases, insulin resistance is what causes high blood sugar and a host of other problems.
Wow.
This was a study that was done. The Kadir study found a strong inverse relationship between the consumption of whole grain foods and subjects' fasting insulin level. Inverse means one went one way, the other way. Yeah. So in other words, the fasting insulin level was pretty much on the positive good side with whole grain foods. Replacing 2 servings of white bread per day with a serving of whole grain bread and a serving of whole grain breakfast cereal resulted in an approximately 15% decrease in fasting insulin. That's just replacing 2 servings of white bread with whole grain. The effects of whole grain on insulin resistance are potentially important in lowering coronary heart disease risk, particularly in reducing, I'm going to go over these with you, hyperinsulinemia. Okay, now before I go into the others. Everybody know what hyper is? Hyper means high or over the normal level. Emia related to the blood. For example, when you say you have anemia, your blood level is very low in iron and things like that. So emia always refers to the blood. Hyper is above the normal level. Like a hypochondriac or things like that. Okay, so let me start this again. The effect of whole grain on insulin resistance are potentially important in lowering coronary heart disease risk, particularly in reducing hyperinsulinemia, high insulin level in the blood, hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, hypertriglyceridemia, high triglycerides in the blood, and low LDL cholesterol. Low HDL. It reduces the risk of low HDL cholesterol and hypertension, high blood pressure. In particularly, magnesium and vitamin E in whole grains may help to mitigate or reduce hyperinsulinemia. So the major things that they have found is magnesium and vitamin E, which is abundant in whole grain, help to reduce the risk of having high insulin levels in the blood. And as I say, with high insulin levels in the blood all the time, that can cause a lot of chronic problems. Not just diabetes, a lot of other chronic problems. Some heart problems, chronically feeling sick and weak and tired and things like that. Soluble fiber found in some whole grain like oats, barley, and rye can delay gastric emptying and insulin response. This action helps to decrease insulin demand and reduce hyperinsulinemia. Okay, explain it this. Soluble fiber, we have two types of fiber in food. We have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. The soluble fiber is a type of fiber that actually holds a lot of liquid. For example, when you put water in oatmeal, it absorbs a lot of that water. That's the soluble fiber in it. The insoluble fiber is the one that makes our lower digestive tract very happy to get rid of waste products. Soluble fiber helps too, but mainly insoluble. Soluble fiber actually helps to lower the amount of insulin that is produced. The reason, when we eat foods with a lot of soluble fiber, it takes a slower process for digestion. So it takes a slower time to digest. For example, if you were to drink apple juice, a cup of, let's say 6 ounces of apple juice, that goes through your system very quickly.
In just a few minutes.
Yeah. And your body produces insulin very quickly to get rid of that sugar. But if you were to have an apple in place of that apple juice, it goes through your system a little slower, so your body doesn't have to rapidly produce insulin to digest that. So it decreases the demand for having a lot of insulin in the bloodstream. So whole grain, because of the soluble fiber, does that. Recommended servings of whole grain. An ounce equivalent is half a cup of cooked brown rice, whole grain pasta, or cooked cereal. So an ounce equivalent of whole grain is considered like half a cup of cooked brown rice, red rice, or black rice, those that have a whole grain, wild rice also, whole grain pasta, or cooked cereal. Half a cup is considered as an ounce equivalent of whole grain. 3 cups of popcorn.
You said wild, not white, right?
Wild, not
Wild.
white.
Not definitely.
Yes. 1 cup whole grain ready to eat cereal. Those are pretty much will give you an equivalent of about 1 ounce of whole grain. We are missing some things here.
No, you told me to take it out.
Okay. God's recommendation for whole grain. And God said in Genesis 1:29, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in that which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." That's God's recommendation. And 1 slide is missing.
No, it isn't. You told
We
me
had
to
a
take it out.
recommendation. Yes, 1 slide is missing that I did. It's not in here.
You told me to take it out.
But we had a recommendation from the government
You
first.
told me to take it out.
No,
Yes, you did.
part of it, not all of it, sorry. Anyway, there was the government recommendation. I had the government recommendation and then God's recommendation. But the government recommendation, this is part of the government recommendation was this. The recommendation is 3 to 5 servings of whole grain per day. 3 to 5 servings of whole grain food per day. And this just tells you what is considered as a serving of whole grain food. Okay, and then I have a power tip here for you. Multigrain or multigrain, whichever way you want to say it, and whole grain are not interchangeable terms. When you pick up something that say multigrain bread, multigrain cereal, it does not necessarily mean that that product is whole grain. Whole grain means that all parts of the grain kernel, the bran, the germ, the endosperm are used. That's the definition of whole grain. Everything, the whole grain kernel is used. In contrast, multigrain means that a food contains more than one type of grain. It does not necessarily have to be whole grain, although none of them may necessarily be whole grain. So multigrain means a product contains different grains. They could have white rice, white flour, white whatever. It does not necessarily mean they are whole grain, so be aware of that. The same goes for other variations such as 7 grain, 9 grain, or all those things. They are not necessarily whole grain. So you always have to look for the whole grain. Some of them can be, but it's not necessarily all whole grain. Multigrain can mean multiple different grains are used in the product, but they are not necessarily whole grain products that are used. So just be aware of that. Okay, and then we have our food for thought. Our bodies are built up from the food we eat. Have you ever heard the term, "you are what you eat"? Mm-hmm. Yes. There is a constant breaking down of the tissues of the body. Every movement of every organ involves waste. Did you ever think about that? But yes, that is true. And this waste is repaired from our food. Each organ of the body requires its share of nutrition. The brain must be supplied with its portion. The bones, muscles, and nerves demand theirs also. So every tissue, every organ demands nutrition. It is a wonderful process that transforms the food into blood and uses this blood to build up the varied parts of the body. But this process is going on continually, supplying with life and strength each nerve, muscle, and tissue. In order to know what are the best foods, we must study God's original plan for man's diet. He who created man and who understands his needs appointed Adam his food. "Behold," he said, "I have given you every herb yielding seed, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for food." Upon leaving Eden, to gain his livelihood by tilling the earth under the curse of sin, man received permission to eat also the herb of the field. So originally, it was this: every herb yielding seed, every tree in which is the fruit, and yielding seed. So it was fruits, nuts, and grains. And then, after sin, came in the vegetables. And this was explained to us why. Anybody remember why? Because the tree of life was no longer available. So we had to get additional nutrition from the vegetables, all the antioxidants and all those things. Okay. And this is the end of the session. And I just want to say thank you. And remember, whole grains are superfood.